We'll honor time and begin. I want to take a moment first in gratitude for all of us, who've been here for the last 2 days and today being the third day. A lot of gratitude to Sujatha for accepting and sharing her a huge, depth of wisdom that she carries in the subject. Also want to thank it's almost a continuum that we are building up. So want to thank the people who anchored and participated in the other webinars. So with that note of gratitude, I would like to take a minute or a minute and a half, because I do see there are a couple of new people here, just to give a very quick orientation. So this webinar is being anchored by People First, and I'm constantly and always I keep learning how do I articulate what People First does in a short period of time. So I'm making another attempt today, which is that basically we're a 25-year firm. We have run it extremely very differently right from the start to now. We wanted to be very good in what we do in our services, but yet we wanted to hold ethics, values, spirituality in the workplace in a very universal way. Whether people believe it or not, we wanted to honor it. The activities that we are in are four. One is talent hiring. Two is life and leadership coaching. We are a lot into education services. We label it as integral education. And we're making more headways into the areas of HR consulting. Somebody new is joining us the beginning of next month to be able to take that forward. This webinar is about innovation. Very pleasantly, we aimed it as a dialogue, and that's exactly what's emerging. And me and Sujatha were catching up yesterday in the night after this and seeing what could birth today, and leave the floor open to see what emerges. So Sujatha, over to you.
Thank you so much, Arul and Uma, and thank you for the opportunity. I've been really enjoying it, and every conversation has been valuable for me as well. We're diving deeper and deeper into some facets of innovation. So let's see how and what emerges. So on that note, I just thought, and also in response to one of the questions on design thinking, I just want to quickly share something that I had for all of you, just for a moment. In terms of, I can probably start with a story which is about Jane Chen. Jane Chen was one of the students at the D School of the Stanford University, where she was doing her management program a couple of 1.5 decades ago. Very bright student. So what actually happens at the D School at Stanford University is that there are a couple of people from different backgrounds who come together to look at extreme innovation and extreme design, right? The background of all of this is the world is moving away from knowledge economy into experience economy. We're moving away from products, just coming up with products, but we're looking at how do we reimagine, recreate experiences for people in this the current scenario. So one such engagement, what happens at the D School is there are problem statements, problems that are shared with the Stanford University by the UN, UNESCO, and various organizations. They're looking at social causes, economic areas that need to be addressed. So one such problem statement that came was to redesign the incubators in Nepal. Okay, so we know what the incubators do. We are not talking about the incubation in the digital space. We're talking about incubators where babies are kept, right? We're talking about those incubators. So the problem statement that came to Jane Chen and her team comprised of a person from the liberal arts background, a mathematician, a chemical engineer, a poet, right? So people from different backgrounds come together, and they had to start looking at this problem statement, which was to redesign the incubators in Nepal. Okay. And what do you think they did? For those of you who I've interacted with a couple of you, so you probably know something about it. What do you think Jane Chen and her team would have done? Any guesses?
Feel free to unmute or put on chat. And I think PA Kuttappa had his one.
Yeah, Kuttappa. Hi, Kuttappa. What do you think Jane Chen and her team would have done? Okay, so I see a response there, a mobile incubator. Okay, any other response? Okay, so one of the responses that I've got here is to come up with a mobile incubator, right? So in the spirit of this approach of design thinking to drive innovation, what they did was they did not sit in Palo Alto to design an incubator that was required in Nepal, but they went all the way to Nepal. Okay, and when they went to Nepal, what they saw out there was they went to the hospital. When they went into the hospitals and they looked around, they realized that the incubators that were there in the hospital were working fine. However, there were no babies in the incubators. And hence, they started, getting a little confused about what they had to do. So if they have to redesign the incubators in Nepal, so they need to know what the problem is. And there were no babies in the incubators. So what they did was they went to the place where the babies were born. So they, and you know the terrain in Nepal. So they went up the mountains to these small little crannies where people had houses to see what was actually happening out there, which is when they realized that a lot of babies were delivered in the homes in Nepal because of a cultural aspect as well. And a lot of the babies, the reason why Nepal was chosen was because 15 million babies are born malnutritioned every year, out of which 1 million of them belong to Nepal. Okay, and they went and actually realized what the problem was. Babies were being delivered in the homes by nannies and nurses and all of it. And the babies were so tiny that they could not be brought to the hospital and put in the incubator. Okay, so they realized what the problem was, and I want to quickly share this with you. All right. Okay. All right. All right. While I'm doing that, I just want you to close your eyes and imagine what they would have seen out there. I want you to stretch your arms and see, and just carry a baby. Right? If you can just carry a baby, stretch your arms and carry a baby. I want you to see how it feels to carry a baby. Could you do that for me? Right? If you can just close your eyes and do that. And in a moment, I'll ask you to open your eyes. Okay? May I request you to open your eyes? And I'm just going to share something with you. Right? Can you see this? Can you see my screen here?
Yes.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes.
And also take a look at what you are holding. Look at what you are carrying when I said carry a baby, and look at what Jane Chen and her team saw when they reached Nepal and the houses in Nepal. This was the size of the babies that they had to carry when they reached these homes. They were so astonished at the size of these babies. So I'm just going to stop sharing. Okay. What they had to do after that was like a huge jigsaw puzzle. They started talking to a lot of the mothers and mothers who had lost babies, mothers who were carrying babies, wet nurses who had delivered babies, and they realized that the magnitude of the situation was really huge. The problem that they had, the reason why what they were currently doing in these homes were they had to keep the babies warm, right? So they had these water bottles placed close to the baby. In some cases, there were also some accidents. Hot water would kind of open. I mean, the bottle would get open and water would spill out. There were cases where cinder was placed next to the baby. Why is it that, the place had to be hot, the room had to be hot? Just because it was important for these babies. Now, what happens with children with malnutrition is they don't have a subcutaneous layer under their skin, because of which they don't survive more than 7 days. So the whole idea of taking them to the hospital from the hilly regions became impossible for them. So the problem statement that came to them initially was to redesign the incubators in Nepal, and that entire exercise appeared to be so futile, right? So what they did, and now to cut a long story short, they came up with the actual problem statement, which is, how do we keep babies warm for the first 10 days after they are born? Okay. After which they could be taken to the incubators, which could then be used, which were not used at all. Right. And they did that, and they came up with some, material. So they use a quick and dirty approach to iterate. We don't think too much along, what is required, what material. You just use simple, easy material to come up with the baby bag. So they came up with baby bags. They showed it to the mothers. What was different with the baby bags that Jane Chen and her team did was that there were these paraffin wrappers that were there behind the baby bags. So it meant that paraffin, which was hard, we had one chemical engineer at the group, right? So paraffin would melt at a high temperature. So the paraffin wrappers had to be dunked in boiling water, and then it had to be placed around the back of the baby bag, right? And that would keep the baby bag warm for about 24 hours, which was not possible earlier, right? They would keep the baby warm for a short while with the water bottles, and it was not sufficing at all. Now, with this approach, right, it was a simple, easy, quick and dirty way of actually addressing the problem, the real problem. They addressed it, and over a period of time, and the mothers were not happy with the first iteration of the baby bag that was presented to them. What was done later was, after the iterations, they made it a lot more user-friendly. And after that, the mothers were comfortable to use it, right? The whole time, the question that was asked was, how do you feel when you see this baby bag, and what is your experience, right? So I'm just going to leave that story with you. And if you have any questions on how this connects to innovation, do let me know. I'm just going to pause now.
In many of the, this is Gopalan, in
Yes, Mr. Gopalan.
many of the tribal areas, people learned one thing in trying to do good for them is first to consult them. They
Beautiful.
designed something and said, take it, oh, this is pretty good for you. Did not work. In fact, housing built for tribals in Himachal Pradesh, nobody went in. Then when asked why you're not doing this, they said, you never asked us what we want.
Beautiful. Yeah.
So in general, whenever you do, even in industry, when you want to do something, first find out the usefulness of it to that particular application. Yeah. So this is a universal law. When you innovate something, you have to find out the usefulness to that particular application. In this case, a baby that fits into your palm, what use is it to have a regular American-sized incubator for a baby of that size? American babies are nearly 10 pounders. My own girl was 7 pounds when she was born. So these are probably ounces, less than a pound, pound and a half, or whatever it is. So that is the basic truth, and one has to see the reality of what is the application. So when somebody really saw that baby for the first time, their heart would have nearly stopped. So an application has to be understood to tailor an innovation. See, innovation is a very big word when it comes to such simple devices. It's not a rocket science or anything to keep something warm like this, like a paraffin or even a kind of a double-layered blanket, would have probably also done the trick for this. And I think the first thing is to go and find out from the society to which you want to do this, what they require. And I think that is the starting point.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for that, Mr. Gopalan. In fact, yesterday there was an example that came from the group, which was about the cylinder that was doled out to a lot of people, and people were not using the cylinder simply because they weren't able to replenish it. So, understanding what the actual need is and what the problem is becomes key to this entire journey to come up with an experience that can be different.
So that's a very interesting learning and focus point to take back into the work and life experience. And today, as we were just beginning our session, we were chatting with Raj. The inner experience and the outer experience, our capacity to understand. So, for example, in this case, if we are serving customers or we are designing some products or doing some things in the workplace and in life, really moving to an experience level rather than just a cognitive understanding, which is just the menu, but going into the experience and really looking at what could be a shift of experience that could be needed, in which case one really has to not only dirty hands, but really be there, out there, and something that is birthed from there. So I think that focus and that learning of experience is really awesome.
Any other thoughts? Yeah.
There is another comment from Dr. Sumati, which is the criteria for solution are important. Okay, she's unmuted.
Yeah, I just thought the criteria for the solution are very important. Then the direction in which innovative ideas will be coming in will be different. The criteria need to be clear. It is not the incubator. It is what is it that we want for the baby. And from there, it has to fulfill these conditions or these criteria. Then only it has to be economical. It has to be with local material. It has to be with feasibility. So the feasibility of the idea will come in, provided even if it is feasible, if it doesn't fulfill the criteria, it may not help.
Yeah, that's beautiful, because it has to be, the criteria is important. What we refer to as the problem statement. I gave you the example yesterday as well of the Insu pen. The problem statement that came was to redesign the cap of the Insu pen, but the problem wasn't with the cap of the Insu pen, right? It was with something else. So, and you're right, the criteria, understanding what the criteria becomes really important, because otherwise we might have a lot of solutions that may not be relevant to the end users.
For example, in this example that you gave, the baby's first week is crucial. The 10 days is crucial. Moving them at that time is not. So keeping them safe for the first 10 days is the first criteria. The temperature is another criteria. Like that, when we list it out, what are the criteria, then we'll be able to. So to do that, what is it that we need to do will be the next question. And then existing solutions are not helpful. That is the reason why we need to innovate.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for that.
Pandian has his hand raised. Pandian?
Hi, this is Pandian. No,
Yes, Mr. Pandey.
as adults, most of us, we have very good thinking, sharp thinking. We are so trained that most of the time we are what they say is solution centered. We go to a doctor and tell the doctor, I want paracetamol. Okay. But a good doctor doesn't do that. Good doctor will still, check the temperature and check the pulse and so on. Because we use a lot of shortcuts, we go straight to the solution, which works most of the time. But I guess when you want to solve a real problem which has not been solved, or you want a new perspective, new way of thinking, we have to spend a little time on what actually is the problem. What I have understood is the problem, or maybe there is something that I don't see. What is the problem trying to solve? Some of those little time there in preparation, most of the time helps a lot in finding new ways, because we realize, maybe as you have said many times, that problem definition is something that we need to spend time on. But all our training and experience, most of the time at least, is to go quickly to the solution. 90% of the cases, maybe this is what it is, and let's try to, we know what the problem is, let's try to find a solution. I mean, there are hundreds of examples, a lot of good ones have come. I thought I'll just mention that.
And I think that's a great point, because the time that we spend, like you rightly picked up, right? In a typical design thinking engagement, we spend 60% of the time on problem exploration. So if you've been able to get that right, the rest of it, which is the ideation and everything, will fall in place. But if we think that we already know the problem and just take it at face value, and whether it comes from hierarchy or somebody right up in the hierarchy or whatever it is, if we are not able to sound it off more people, then it becomes a little difficult. In fact, we also use this approach, and you might want to Google that. It's called analogous empathy, because not always are we able to talk to the person who has the pain, right? So if we can talk to similar people, right, who we think might be along the same, let's say the criteria, the peer group, similar colleagues, all of that, even then it should suffice, because amongst that lot there will be somebody who will come up with a problem which might be akin to somebody else. So we call that analogous empathy. Just to give you an example, I might be working with somebody in the manufacturing automobile sector, and that person might be in the sales space. I don't necessarily have to talk to only people in the automobile sales sector. I can talk to somebody in the pharmaceutical industry, or I can talk to somebody in the retail industry who is also doing something similar, and I'll be able to pick up some facets. But what we need to do is to understand through stories. Get them to talk to you about stories, and that is what we do in design thinking. Get people to share more and more stories and experiences. How are they using the current, whether it is the blanket or whether it is a warm bed, how are they currently using it to keep the baby warm? Because it helps us understand what the pain points are. When they just give us pictures and or if they just talk to us about it, we may not be able to pick up enough. So understanding through stories, or being able to experience it along with the person who we are having the empathy conversation with, definitely helps.
I
A
just
lot
wanted
of new product ideas have come because that particular company spent some time gaining user insights. What do the user really want? How do they use the product, and so on. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I just want to add to something what Pandian said, and I think it's very important that anything new, from what I've understood in life and work, comes when we are with something for a long period of time. We are with something, connecting back to the experience insight that Sujatha had given. So if I'm working on something, let's say the example that Pandian shared about a doctor, if I'm with a patient, or the patient is coming already going at the solution, or if I'm already going at a prefix solution, there is no spending time with what exactly is at this point of time in this moment. Innovation or something new is born in the moment most of the time. It just pops up. So what I've actually understood in these cases is if you're truly with that, the doctor is looking at the pulse, looking at the temperature, you get a pop-up of a solution. It comes as an insight or an intuition, something just happens, and that often leads to something new. So this is important, what I thought Pandit was sharing. So to avoid going for the prefix solution, which is, I think it's a big trap, it's a bias, but rather really being with something. And that's what I thought, Sujatha also meant about the empathetic listening, being with something, being with the experience, going into the nuances of it. Then I think something opens up there as a newness or a possibility. This is what I've understood.
Maybe one humorous example I should add. I used to work for a large automobile company. The design people, they do a lot of good work. They do come up with a lot of good ideas. Once a lady in the team made many senior executives wear high heels, sit in the car seat, and use the brake pedal and the accelerator pedal. Awesome. To see how what happens when women drive. I really don't know whether it's one of those apocryphal stories, a corporate legend, or true, but I thought, very strikingly it illustrates.
I think that's a fabulous example, Mr. Pandyan, because just saying I empathize with you doesn't suffice, right? So yeah, this is something similar to what I actually did with my colleagues in Mysore when they were doing up the pavements in that beautiful facility that we have. So I was very particular about them wearing our footwear, and because it's impossible to walk through those small little grooves because your feet just get stuck out there. Right. So we actually did that. So I that's a lovely example that you gave. Yeah. Okay. All right. So with that, I have another story which actually caused the U.S. exchequer in the energy efficiency sector about 20 billion USD, okay, on a yearly basis. Let me just give you this one. Yeah, 24 billion USD was the power loss, right? So this is another project that we worked on, that I worked on, but I'll keep that for later. And I'll probably take a couple of questions if you have. And there is this piece around metrics that we need to get onto. There is a piece around VUCA that we need to get onto. So we'll address some of those things and then probably get into this, work that that I've done with a 170-year-old cable industry in the US. Yeah.
There's already a question.
Yeah.
Uma, you want to read?
I think it's a question and a comment. So I think one was, how do we sustain a culture of innovation? This is from Anto. And the other one was from Ramachandran, which is, nowadays competition is not coming from same industries. Banking industry is facing competition from fintech companies. I know automobile is facing from IT companies. So I guess that was a comment. So I don't know if Ramachandran had something follow on from there. Yeah.
Okay. So my response to, I'll just take both these questions. How do we sustain innovation, right? Again, this culture of innovation is very beautiful, because if you don't feed it, it can die, right? So what is the best thing to feed it with, right? Is to allow for, and this is something that I mentioned, I think on day one, which is to be okay with failure, right? Not every project that we get into has to be successful. Just like not every experience that we try to create for, let's say, the banking sector is going to be successful, right? So we need to be comfortable creating a culture that embraces, and I mentioned it's embraces, I emphasize on that, because it's very difficult to embrace failure, especially in an organization where, monies matter. Okay, so if we are able to create a culture which embraces failure, that is one of the biggest successes that we have seen where innovation will survive. Survive and proliferate. Okay, so this is one thing. The other one is staying with, the piece that Arul was highlighting, which is to be okay just being with the problem, right? And I was referring to them as dark spaces, right? It's okay to be in those dark spaces and not get a solution right away. It's okay not to get those aha moments, because I might be jumping in, I might be jumping down the wrong rabbit hole. So how do I actually feel comfortable accepting ambiguity? How do I feel comfortable and, okay with not knowing the answers right at the beginning? Now, these are some of the things that actually can be cultivated in the organization. And at the root of all of this is trust. How can you build a culture of trust, of okayness, of acceptance? Right? And these are all terms that we use most of the time. Everyone uses it. But then how authentically are we using it? That becomes a deeper question for us to ask. It also is about the culture of an organization. It also is about the value systems of an organization. So if we are able to address some of these, areas, again, can this be, and this is one thing, one is the piece around, the dark spaces. The other one is about failure. The third one is about innovation can't be driven only top down or bottom up. It has to come from both sides. And one of the things that we've seen is, at least, I was able to resonate with what happened in my organization about 3-4 years ago, because that's exactly the approach that was taken, right? It was top down and bottom up. But there were also times where, leadership would be disillusioned, or, particular generation that had come into the organization would be disillusioned. They wanted things to move faster. Somewhere there has to be a synergy. And when we're working with the top down and the bottom up approach, it's like carrying this beautiful load and, making sure that things don't fall. And it's such a beautiful experience if you're able to pull it off, right? Uh, to be able to sustain it, again, continue with the same kind of creating that space for each other and for allowing people to express themselves. The ideal situation is when everyone is okay with everyone, right? But that's not the reality. Right? There will be differences in opinions, so people have to come in with different perspectives. And while bringing that together, at the heart of all of that, if you're able to understand that, hey, you know what, finally, what's the vision of the organization? What is the big picture? Where are we headed? Right? The why part of it, if it comes up and it is continuously given back to the members in the organization, the ownership becomes a lot higher. So it is acceptance of failure, dark spaces, being okay in the dark spaces, to be able to trust and create an ecosystem that nourishes each other, and then to be able to get an understanding of what the bigger picture is. These are some of the things that have worked. Okay.
That's great.
Thank you, Mr. Mato. So the next one,
I think Ramachandran just wanted to say something.
Ramachandran, I think,
yes,
wants to
please,
share.
yeah.
See, I think, as you rightly said, there should not be any hierarchical approach. Recently, I saw a case wherein in US, many of the fighter aircrafts and pilots were doing the deep diving exercise. Many of the skilled pilots that crashed and they could not survive. So people were, every time they were blaming that pilots were not efficient enough to handle that diving situation. So immediately, one new intern, he has joined that Air Force, and he was just seeing the details and other things. When he was just going inside the cockpit, he could find that brake is not reachable. Even though he's not driving it, he could not reach the brake. Then he immediately told the seniors that it is not because of this problem. Only thing is the brake is not in a position to maneuver in case of any emergencies, because it was standardized based on the measurements, based on the height and weight of the pilots. It is not really based on the design factors involved for the people who are there in this. So it triggers them, and finally they could design the better aircraft. It is purely based on the person who has just joined the Air Force.
How beautiful. Yeah,
Because
I know. Because some of these nuances we really tend to miss, thinking that they are not important. And the moment we realize that if someone's able to sound it off, I think it becomes a lot more easier. Yes, Mr. Ramchandran, you were about to say something?
Yes, yes, yes. Yes. How the design thinking plays a vital role when we are open up for ideas.
Yeah. Okay. Mr. Ramchandran, you did have a question, right? On how IT companies and manufacturing or automobile companies.
No, banking and fintech.
Banking. Okay, banking.
It was a comment, so maybe competition is not coming from same
Oh,
industry.
sorry. Okay. All right. Yeah. And this has been, if you look at the hype cycle, right? One of the things that we're continuously seeing is there is going to be a merging of practices, industries in 2025, right? And which is just around the corner. There are going to be a whole lot of industries that will merge, right? What are these gray areas? Cluster economies, cluster industries. So this is here to stay. It's not as if we're going to have those beautifully defined industry verticals that we had earlier. It's going to go away. And there's a lot of thrust to make that happen, because we've seen that when there is cross-pollination of information from fintech to banking, or from automobile to IT, when we're having those driverless cars, the whole idea is to see how we can lean on each other and work and understand each other's strengths, right? Because there are a whole lot of things. Now, I was referring to something on day one, which is called the Gov Hack. Now, we're doing this in Australia. Australian government is doing this, and my company is partnering with them to look at how innovative ideas can emerge from different industries. How can industries come together and not look at one experience only for that particular industry, but can it cut across, right? So, in fact, there is a lot of focus on merging of such industries, which is why we will see a lot more innovation happening in a space. Just to give you an example, in couple of our facilities, uh, we wanted to understand the user experience, customer experience of people, or the buyer experience, right? What are some of the ways in which we can do that? We've actually brought together, big data and machine learning to understand these patterns, like you would have heard in other industries as well, other organizations as well. So when people, and there are two ways in which that was done. One was to work with the retail and the, what do you say, the plants. So that would be the bioengineering wing of the organization. So we worked with the bioengineering wing as well as the retail industry. So when they moved along the pathway and walked along with, walked beside some plants, the user experience or the customer experience to buy a particular product increased. Okay, so that was something that was done. Another example that comes to my mind is work that we did with, one of the tractor companies, okay, which has a presence in Chennai as well. But we worked with a team in Germany. So the tractor wheels, right, is going on soil. How can we benefit from the information of the soil that is being picked up by the tires of the tractor? Right? Using that, we were able to understand the soil patterns, and it actually turned into a totally different business model, where the tractor company has now moved in the space of what kind of fertilizers are required and traceability of natural products that are required for the soil, and then how does it get onto the shop racks, which is the retail. So there are three industries that have come together here. One is the automobile, the other one is the fertilizers and all of it, the soil composition. The third one is how can we make sure that we are able to put a put on the shop racks, the product that people can trust, because there is extreme traceability, and that's where blockchain and all of that comes in. So it is coming together. There are a lot of examples already, and it's here to stay. So now coming back to GovHack and similar engagements that we are having in India as well, it's important for us to understand that co-creation, collaboration are ways for us to survive, right? If we want to be relevant to the industry, it's important for us to be able to feel comfortable working with and then exploring something which is beyond whatever we can even imagine. Mr. Ramchandran, is that okay? Okay. Are there any other questions there? I saw something from Kutapa. Was it a comment?
So there's a comment, yeah.
Yeah, take that. Yeah, I was just saying there are two. Yeah, go ahead, Uma.
So there are times when the end user shifts the use of a particular product from its intended purpose to something else, and the producer never knew about this particular attribute of the product.
So true. Would you want to share your example or your experience in that space?
Yeah, why not? So this happened about 23 years ago.
Okay.
I used to work with this organization called Asian Paints. So many of you will recall there's a product called Touchwood.
Yeah.
So this particular product is largely used on furnitures or doors, windows. So one of those days I got a call from this company called Indian Telephone Industries. They said, can you come over? So I was like pretty interested in saying, okay, it's a large complex, so a lot of material that will go in. So when I landed up there, I ended up with a technical research team. They said, like, how fast can you supply Touchwood? I said, as much as you want. So what is this for? So then they showed me a simple PCB, a printed circuit board, which was transitioning from your dial phone to push button phones. This is, I'm talking about the 1993, 94, when the digital, the DOT revolution was happening. So how did Touchwood get into on top of a PCB? They realized when phones were tested in places like Himachal or Uttarakhand, the fungus hits these PCBs because of the moist temperature. As a result, the telephone structures would collapse. So they were coating this with Touchwood.
Wow.
To prevent, any fungal infections or moisture disrupting the services. So they wanted a lab report and things like that. So when I went back to my technical team, they were like flabbergasted in terms of saying that, how can this be used? This is not meant for that.
I know, having to hear from the customers.
For over 18 months, over say 2 seasons, multiple seasons. So they have confidence in our product. So you need to give us a certificate. So that became a huge shift in the usage of a product. It's one of those examples.
Absolutely. I think that's a great example. And these, situations that just knock us down, because we're probably going in a very parochial manner, thinking that, okay, here's the only way in which a particular industry works, or a particular skill works, or a service can be offered. And to be able to see that it's beyond that. And I think that there's a lot of mindfulness that is required to be able to embrace that and pick up those nuances that keep coming back to us. Somewhere, I'm going back to something that Arul also spoke about, which is intuition. And, Mr. Anto also spoke about it, which is intuition. right? Where does that come in this entire journey of, innovation? And if you're looking at redefining or reimagining experiences for end users, it becomes so much more important for us to be mindful, to be self-aware, to be present during those conversations, because otherwise we are losing a lot of beautiful ideas that are being thrown at us continuously.
Yes, I just want to add two things. I think this is a brilliant example. My personal belief is that if, let's say, for example, you go to a temple, the quality of an energy field in the temple, to me personally, is not only built by the pujari or whatever happens there, more so it is built by the faith of the people who come in. This is what I've actually observed, over many years of, I love doing experiments inside a temple, especially in Kerala. I spend hours just watching what's happening there. And this is what I've understood. Now, the second example is from a particular client of mine. They are in a field where they have to keep innovating. Now, they were having a challenge. The challenge being that internally they had some fantastic people, but they were losing out to competition. And one of the things that, when they did a pulse and we started talking to the employees, what was actually happening is the customers were giving the clues, like to the product, what it could do next and all that. But when these people were bringing it back, there was a set strategy of how things should go. There was a set innovation strategy. And it was around, how to make it quick in shorter life cycle spans, whereas certain ideas that they were giving required a longer gestation period.
Yeah.
So the whole complaint of the team was they were losing out to competition, whereas once they were really on top, but they were not listening to the voice of the customer. So I think the point that Kuttappa brought is very important. I don't think organizations own their products and services fundamentally. I think they are just instruments and vehicles. When it is out there, it belongs to everybody and everybody is co-creating it. If you can truly listen to what emergence is happening, that's the innovation space. That's the incubation and intuition space. That's, I just wanted to add to that.
That's beautiful. Yeah. And being with the client during those sprints and being okay to accept what is coming from the client, I think that is beautiful.
Vishnupriya had a question, so I'm just going to check if she would like to just unmute and ask me, comment on a question. So Vishnupriya, do you want to just unmute or do you want me to read it out?
Yeah, you can read it out, Uma.
Okay. So it's very inspiring to see that you use empathetic listening for understanding the problems. The human touch is something that's very important. With the NEP to be implemented soon, National Education Policy, I'm assuming, the education sector is going through a paradigm shift. So innovation is here to stay. We have to accept this if we have to move forward. Blended learning, how to handle the live lab sessions required, clinical teaching required for medical graduates, etc. So that comes to how to make the conservative faculty take up innovative practices gracefully so that the center of learning, that is the university, can become a center of excellence.
Yeah. I think that's a great thought, Vishnupriya. I'm also thinking, this is definitely a huge opportunity to reimagine education. And when we reimagine education, we are reimagining the growth that is getting infused into the country. So, I think that's great. And this is something that we've kind of deliberated with for a while. So it's not like it's the ultimate example, not at all. Just like everyone else, we are dirtying our hands. We are trying to experiment, and experimentation is another facet of design thinking, and it's a philosophy that we like to continue to work on. So the need for us to focus on the end user. The end user here is the learner. So at the journey of the learner has a lot of contribution from the person who they're learning from, which is the teacher. right? So if we have to bring about changes in the way the learners learn, it's only because of the way in which the teachers teach, right? So because you referred to the empathy conversations, what we did was we connected our educators with the end users, which is our learners, okay, in that particular segment, in the education segment. So what actually helped was, and you might experience that there will be denial. The learners might want to learn in different ways. They don't want classroom learning. They don't want to learn monoliths of courses that run into 48 hours in a stretch. They don't want to do that, right? They want to bite-sized learning. They might want fun in the learning, but at the same time, they don't want a physical space to hold them together. They don't want to be held accountable coming into a classroom and getting out. So there's a lot of things that emerged from these conversations that the educators had with the learners. Initially, there was resistance where people would come back and say, how can they tell me what to do? Because this is my space. I own the COE in big data or anything else. And then we would still go ahead and tell them, but let's listen, right? There might be some, let's give them the benefit of doubt and let's listen to what's happening out there. Let's see what their asks are. And what actually happened was, in a typical, there is resistance, and after that, they also come to terms with what is happening. And once they came to terms with what was happening, and they tried new different ways, how do we facilitate in these labs? We call them living labs. Okay, so how do we facilitate in these living labs? How do we sit with them when they are dabbling in the incubation centers? How do we actually co-create along with a learner who might have absolutely no understanding? How can we look at reverse engineering, which is something that I spoke about yesterday? How are we willing to shed those egos to say, hey, you know what? I probably have to relook at the way in which I'm teaching. Can I also learn as part of this journey? Was it easy? Not at all, right? But have we been able to make headways? Because the learners of today are so digitally savvy. They want everything at the tip of their fingers. They want, and we need to give them experiences. We need to create experiences. We need to bring in the AR and the VR. And we're talking about, I'm not talking about my organization because digital aspect is something that is taken care of. But when I've also spoken to people in the school fraternity, some of the things, they're not comfortable using technology at all. So how do we then take them along with us? Because without their expertise, the learners will not learn, but they also need to feed the right kind of an expertise. So getting the teachers, in response to your question, getting the teachers to just listen to what the learners want to hear, right? We're not referring to the content. We're talking about the mechanism of the learning that the learner might want to learn. And it's not going to be cognitive, it's not going to be conceptual, it has to be very case study driven. They want to dirty their hands. And there is one more piece which I want to share out here: makers, right? The makers and the doers law, right? It's not about knowing about all these things at a conceptual level, but it's about the making and the doing. So if you go to the US education system, you will see that there is a lot of makers projects that learners are given, because the only way to learn is to be able to use the entire work model. And are we really using all the work model when we are delivering any kind of a training? So these are things that the teachers have to get those aha moments, and that becomes really important.
So
Thank you, Sujatha. That was great. Thank you.
Yeah. So just two quick examples to underline what you were sharing. The education space is already going through huge amounts of shift and innovation, in my personal view, in very simple ways. What it needs is teachers and parents to be able to deeply listen to the inner configuration of the child and the aspiration. And I'm going to share two very quick examples. There was a boy who was coming to the beyond schooling class about a couple of years back. He was in the 8th standard. His mom used to come to my office once in 15 days for a one-to-one. So he thought one-to-one is cool. And through his mom, he reached out to me saying, "Uncle, can you do a one-to-one coaching with me?" I said, "Okay, come." So he fixed a 1 hour slot and he walks into my office and he has a discussion about his aspirations. As he was coming out, there was a library and he said, "Uncle, can I pick a book here?" His hand went to Good to Great and hit refresh of Satya Nadella. Okay, I was like, "Oh, you want to read it? Okay, take it." He comes back in a week or 10 days time, fixing another appointment. And he says, "Uncle, I've read the book." I said, "Have you read the book?" I said, "Okay, so can you share insights?" He actually shared. He went on to pick a couple of books. And I actually reached back to the mom and said, "Is he actually reading?" Now, mom SMS, WhatsApps me back, "You wouldn't believe he's really diving into the book." Now, I was in touch with him for a year and a half, guiding him, working with some ideas, entrepreneurial. He discovered his aspiration was to become an entrepreneur. As an 8th standard student, he was reading books that is resonating to us. Okay. Now, his mom was good-willed enough to feed the aspiration. I want to give another example. A mom reaches out to me saying, "My daughter, 9 years old, 10 years old, is labeled as a learning disabled child." Okay. Now, I said, let both come on Zoom. And yes, the daughter was behaving slightly strangely from a normal perspective. But I did my process, which is like, using the natural breath. And in an hour, we discovered the child is extremely gifted because she has a extraordinary capacity to listen to inner sounds. So anything she's learning outside, she translated this as sounds. And anything which touches her experience, she grabs it. With just these two formulas, we've been working with the child, more so the mother, not me. I'm just, guiding the mother from the back. In the last 2 months, there's been a fantastic breakthrough in the mother's capacity to allow the child to learn the different subjects because we figured the inner configuration. So going back to design thinking, going back to the aspect of being with somebody, being with the problem at an experiential level, how is the inner configuration working is really going to create a huge breakthrough in the field of education, because the individuation of the student is happening earlier now than our own times. So it's a huge opportunity. Individuation means that the discovery of who am I and what can I do. Now, in that young age, if we can accomplish it, we are definitely going to have a new world.
That's brilliant.
You took me really back to 1980s. There was one disabled boy like this. His father came to us and asked us, "Can you do something with this boy?" So I said, "Okay, let's send him every day to my factory. I will give him something." Otherwise, he was violent at home because he was looking at his brother who was working in a bank, and this guy was of a marriageable age, and the elder brother was married already. So this was a thing, it's a complex that was building into him, which nobody could understand. And so his father possibly understood something and came to us for this request. I said, "Send him to the factory." So I gave him a corner and gave him some file and some components to work on. And his father said within a week, there was a remarkable change in the boy. He has calmed down a lot. He keeps talking about the factory. He keeps talking about the good times that he's having. There was nothing like a good time I saw that he was having. But internally, it made such a big difference to him that he was discovering himself. Like what you said now about the child, that disabled child. He was also a disabled boy from that point of view. He had his hands and legs okay, but his mind was not in the place where it should be. So I'm saying, rehabilitation is a very delicate subject, but it does do it. I mean, since you said this, I went back to that boy, and before in 1980s it happened.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Great. The session is really awesome with Sujatha, Arul, and everybody sharing. It's a super session. Go ahead. And Gopalan.
Opening batsman.
Good.
I think there's some comments from Kuttappa and Pandian. I think people can read that. But there was one question from Nandu, which is you mentioned PARC a couple of times yesterday. They apparently have a strong innovation culture. Anything relevant for us from there?
So an offshoot of the park is actually, and park was started by Xerox, I think way back in 1970, but it still holds good. When I was talking about GovHacks that is happening in Australia, it's something similar. The whole idea is to bring in people who have different competencies, who have different ideas, but they don't know how to, you know, see it taking shape and form and how to execute it, right? And we're talking about people who are entrenched in different technologies, right, at the park. So they go ahead and brainstorm, and this is by invitation only. So each person, if they feel that there are 10 others who they can invite, but when they invite them, they need to belong to different areas, skills, and expertise. So they need to invite people from different backgrounds, and they may not necessarily collaborate with the person. So if I've invited 10 people, I don't have to collaborate with them. Anyone can do that. And fortunately, we have platforms, we have technologies where people put in all their inputs, and there are sensors which guide people to connect with others as part of that engagement itself. And they can come together because we're talking about large numbers, but there is some way in which technology comes together to, plays a role to bring people together in case there is some kind of a, what do you say, some kind of recommendations that come out from, people knowing each other or having similar interests or wanting to do something which is similar. So they use a little bit of AI out there to identify people, to put them into groups, and it happens virtually. And it's a beautiful experience because you, like I mentioned yesterday, that from Park, a couple of the ideas that have come in from Park have taken shape and form, whether it is the Google glasses or whether it is, I think, Volocopter was one thing that was used, which are the taxi choppers that are currently being used in the UAE region, which started off at the parks, and it was presented at the CES in 2018, and it's being currently used in UAE now, right? So it's a great opportunity to network, collaborate, and work with people who belong to different backgrounds and come up with products and products, services, and experiences. So these are some of the things that are happening at the Prats.
Sujatha, we want to keep in mind that we're at 7:33. So another maybe 10 minutes or so. So
yeah. I just wanted to respond to two questions. One was about VUCA, the pandemic and the VUCA. So while we are aware of VUCA, and we've been speaking about it for a long time, during the pandemic, while the same situation continues, right? It is about flipping this entire piece inward, right? So if we are talking about volatility there, can we start looking at being okay with vulnerability here, right? Vulnerability, yeah, navigating through the unknown. Something that I'd put down here under C, and the last one is about awareness. Now, if we are able to flip the VUCA into something which is more inward and accept it, we might be in a better position to deal with situations. Otherwise, we will look at VUCA as a negative probably, I mean, you can look at it as a negative thing or you can look at it as an opportunity, but it also helps to, look at internalizing VUCA and to see how we can deal with it differently. That's a thought that comes to my mind, because VUCA in any industry is there to stay. Likewise, VUCA is there even during the pandemic. But can we look at it slightly differently? Can we look at it in a way that will probably benefit us in the long run? If we are able to accept that vulnerability is okay, accept that there will be a lot of the unknown, then our ability to counter it or deal with it or go along with it or co-create along with it might be a lot more better and easier. So that was a thought that I had.
Just input on that. In my personal view, vulnerability is trust, faith, and flow. So we keep moving. The challenges are anyway going to be there.
Yeah.
But we keep moving. It's a deep sensing. It's a faith. It's a flow. It's a trust. And we were having multiple conversations, including with Mr. Gonzalez a couple of weeks back, as to how vulnerability is really a positive inner state. Something to be celebrated and invoked.
Absolutely. Okay, so that was one part of it. And then the other one, which was about metrics. I alluded to it a little bit on day 1 and day 2. So do we really need to have a metrics around innovation? Yeah. I was sharing something that we had done with William Miller, a particular approach. We had done some work with, thinking hats and all of it. There are so many of these problem solving approaches that we've kind of dabbled with. But what actually helped us was to look at innovation in an inward way, which is bring in the empathy component and then connect it to what is required from the client for their end users. The moment we looked at that, our understanding of the problem statement became different. Now, why am I bringing this here? It's because if we just have a metrics to say, hey, you know what, we need to increase productivity by X%. If we go ahead and do it, and we continue to do it for a long time, we will have changes, but we won't be looking at anything which is outstanding and out of the world, right? We will make those incremental changes. So if we are able to understand, how do we recreate, which is the reason why I wanted to share this. And in case I'm not able to do that, you can probably Google for this. Here is an 170-year-old cable company, right? And they produce high quality aluminum, copper, and fiber optics. Okay. The problem statement that they came to us with was to increase the energy efficiency in the power lines. And we are talking about power lines that are 400,000 miles long. Why do they want to make some changes in the power lines? Because there's been a power loss which has been hitting their exchequer to the tune of about 24 billion USD. Okay. Now I'm just going to quickly share this with you. When we went to the place to do a recce on what is the actual problem, right? I'm going to quickly share this with you. Okay. Let me know if you're able to see the screen.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, can see.
You can see the screen? Okay, but unfortunately that's not the screen. Just give me a moment. Okay, I'm just going to show you this picture. Okay, so here is the problem statement that we need to bring in efficiency. What we realized when we went there is these power lines, these lines, right, are filled with dirt, are filled with grease. You also have animal bird poop on it. You have fertilizers that are being used, which have left a residue on the power lines. Okay, and these are really high up in the air, as you can see. But what actually drew our attention, and you will see that, you know, some of these power lines, at least 75% of these power lines were 25 years old, and about 15 to 20% of them needed restoration about 15 years ago. Okay. Now, the problem is that they could not turn off the electricity that was passing through these power lines because it would be an outage, and that was not okay. But what actually caught our attention, you know, all these can be addressed. Yeah. But what you see out there, which are those two pictures, the way in which these power lines were being cleaned by these people, it's supposed to be one of the world's riskiest jobs. Now, they go on a chopper, they are dropped on the on those power lines, they walk on the power lines, and they clean those power lines. Okay, this entire length. Now, when we looked at this, what we also did was we were in shock. Okay, but we spoke to the families of these people who are doing this job. When we spoke to them, the family spoke to us about how scared they were every time their husbands went out to do this job of cleaning those power lines. Right? And it was extremely sad to hear that, you know, while it's a very high paying job, they always almost never knew if they would come back alive. Right? So they either went onto the power lines and cleaned it, or they would get onto the chopper. In the chopper, there is this other piece. From the chopper, they have these high pressure water that is sent to the power lines to clean it. And it's an extremely dangerous thing that they're doing, but they're doing it with a lot of caution. Now, what we were able to do when we used our understanding of, you know, not just design thinking, but it was more about how do I understand the real problem, was when we spoke to the spouses and we understood how uncomfortable and they were and how painful the job was, because they would be very, very tired when they came back after cleaning these power lines. So yeah, so this is one thing that I wanted to share, that large challenges can also be addressed if we are able to see what the real problem is. The real problem here is the human part of it, which is how can I redefine the work that these people who are cleaning the power lines do. Okay, so, you know, what happened, what we were able to do eventually is a different part, right? We use robotics and RPA and all of that to come up with robots that would clean these power lines, and there was a huge saving for them. But along with the saving, we also were able to save the lives of a lot of people who are doing this kind of a job, just to make sure that they were cleaning the power lines. This is something that I wanted to share with you because, you know, this is an example of how, and it's a huge business model that we've come up with after that. And the, you know, the revenue that we've got is about 60 million USD. It's a large contract, but more than anything else, what we really enjoyed in this entire experience was that we were able to address the real need of people on the ground. When we went back to them and asked them whether they were uncomfortable with this entire thing, you know, did they lose out on their revenue of cleaning that, they said life is more important, and you've been able to address that particular factor. So, you know, these are some of the things that actually tell us that if you're able to understand the real problem, the way in which we address the solution becomes very different.
Thank you, Sujatha. So we are at about 7:45. So could I bring this to a close? Any thoughts from your side, or shall I just look at how to put this together?
Please go ahead.
Close in a couple of minutes. Yeah. Okay. All right. So for me personally, as I was beginning the session 2 days back, I was feeling that it's not a 3-day webinar. We are making a beginning. of something of which I don't know yet, because this is a very important topic. So as we close, let's see if this is a beginning of something. Maybe something can dialogue between us. Something can be born between us. Maybe we could come back into something. I already spoke to Sujatha on day one end, saying we will run a design thinking, around some large difficulty or problem that we have and see how we could incubate, birth it. So let's just take it as beginners at this point of time. We have made a beginning. Let's see what evolves. We also have a couple of other webinars coming up. The next in line would be a dialogue between Anto Vincent and Arul Dev. For people who don't know, Anto Vincent has been in the HR field quite a bit. He's also my father. So I personally, we're going to dialogue around leadership, around a book that Dad wrote. We're going to have it in the beginning of September. And for me, it's a very important thing, like a father-son coming together and seeing what we can birth. The next in line is Pandian and Nandu, who are here. We're going to, Pandian, Nandu, and Uma are going to dialogue around HR. So it's a continuum. And with Sujatha, I see that she carries something extremely rich, extremely empathetic. And I'm seeing whether we could incubate something, around us. And with that, I would like to bring this to a close. Any last comments, Sujatha?
I think what you said was beautiful. There is always an opportunity to co-create, to collaborate, to come up with something which is new, different, and wacky and wild. So I'm sure this is going to be just the start. And thank you so much for the opportunity. And thanks a lot for all the lovely, lovely questions and sharing that came in as part of the this interaction, this dialogue.
So thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. See you soon.
See you. Bye. Have a great evening.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for the good work. Keep doing it.
Thank you, Mr. Gopalan. Thank you. Thank you all.
Okay, bye. Good night.